What is up, family? Today we are going to be teaching you everything that you need to know about the Havoc Demon Hunter going into Season 3. We're going to cover talents, gear, consumables and enchants, your stat priority as well, most importantly the rotation, and also any macros that you might use. So let's get straight into it. So, the whole kind of idea with Aldrachi Reaver is to generate and consume soul fragments. Every 6 soul fragments that you consume is going to generate you a Reaver Glaive, which is basically it just going to buff your damage, okay? So in the class side of the talent tree, we have Chaos Nova here, which is normally and has always been used as an AOE stun and CC. We're still going to use it for that reason, but the reason I wanted to touch on this talent in specific was because of Chaos Fragments, which gives a 30% chance to generate a lesser soul fragment from every enemy that is stunned by this Chaos Nova, massively increasing the generation of your soul fragments and therefore massively increasing the generation of the Reaver Glaive procs that you get. So I've just moved myself up to the top left of the corner because we're going to cover some more talents that are going to increase our soul fragment generation. One of these being Sigil of Spite. This is going to shatter up to 3 lesser soul fragments from the enemies that are affected by it. So we definitely want to pick up this talent. Like I said, Aldrachi Reaver is all about generating and consuming these soul fragments. To further build on that, then we have the Soul Sigils talent here, which basically means that whenever you place a sigil down, whether that's a Sigil of Flame, a Sigil of Misery, I think that's all that you have, well, Sigil of Spite as well, that is also going to generate you a lesser soul fragment, okay? So Chaos Fragments, Soul Sigils, and also Sigil of Spite locked in because we need to generate all of those soul fragments to get more Reaver Glaives. Speaking of proccing more Reaver Glaives, we then have the Hunt, which is a 1.5 minute cooldown. This is a huge amount of damage, and we're going to basically use it on cooldown as well. But this is also going to guarantee you a Reaver Glaive every single time you press this ability. So be careful with pressing this ability if you already have a Reaver Glaive or you're nearing a Reaver Glaive proc from consuming soul fragments, because this will munch your Reaver Glaive that you already have, and then you're losing out on a Reaver Glaive and all of that extra damage, okay? So that is all of the kind of notable talents that we will be covering in the class side of the talent tree. So let's move over to the Aldrachi hero talent itself. Now, as I mentioned, every 6 soul fragments that you consume turns your Throw Glaive into a Reaver Glaive. This does a huge amount of damage and also buffs up your next 2 abilities in Chaos Strike and also Blade Dance. And that will be Annihilation and Death Sweep inside of your meta cooldown. Now, with the Season 3 tier set, we'll cover this later, but with the Season 3 tier set, you want to always use your Chaos Strike first after you throw your Reaver Glaive, and then use your Blade Dance after, because the first ability that you use after your Reaver Glaive gets buffed slightly, and the next one gets buffed even more. And that's going to play into the tier set, which is going to make our Fury of the Aldrachi further empower our Blade Dance when it's cast after Chaos Strike, and increase the amount of slashes that it does to 12. This is by far and away your biggest source of damage now. So super sick, but basically all you need to do is always use Chaos Strike immediately after your Reaver Glaive and then follow it with a Blade Dance. So as you can see here, if you immediately Blade Dance after your Reaver's Glaive, the Blade Dance is going to slash 3 additional times. If, however, you cast it after your Chaos Strike, it would normally slash an additional 6 times, but because of the tier set, that is buffed up to 12, and this is fatty damn. If instead you were to use your Blade Dance first after your Reaver's Glaive and then use your Chaos Strike, with the tier set, that would apply 3 Reaver's Marks to the target that stack up on top of each other, causing that mob to take 18% increased damage from you for 20 seconds. But regardless, if you go Chaos Strike after your Reaver's Glaive into Blade Dance, that Chaos Strike is going to apply 1 stack of Reaver's Mark. And if you're lucky with the Reaver Glaives, then you can get that stacked up to 3 stacks of Reaver's Mark as well. So you're not losing out there, but it's also just worth the damage to always buff up your Fury of the Aldrachi to make it slash 12 times. Now, in the middle here, we do have a little choice node. The other choice nodes are kind of locked in, to be honest. But in the middle here, we have Army unto Oneself and also Incorruptible Spirit. Now, in lower keys, you probably will take Incorruptible Spirit because each soul fragment you consume is going to shield you for an additional 15% of the amount healed. So that's just some super nice self-sustain on top of what we already have in great self-sustain for the Havoc DH. In higher keys, Fellblade with this talent becomes a 10% damage reduction, which is super nice for hard-hitting abilities, one-shots and stuff like that. If you can survive by taking 10% damage off with a Fellblade, there's always resetting. You can reset with Vengeful Retreat in a pinch if you want as well. this becomes super valuable in those higher keys, and I would probably recommend taking this, but as a general rule, I would probably take Incorruptible Spirit instead. This choice node is pretty much locked in as well. You generate so much fury as it is anyway, so we're just going to go with Preemptive Strike instead. And then down the bottom, after consuming both enhancements, so after you send Reaver Glaive, Chaos Strike, Blade Dance, you're then going to gain 15% attack speed for 20 seconds and also increase your damage and healing by 15% for 10 seconds. So the latter portion of this buff, where you get the damage buff by 15% for 10 seconds, is more important here. And ideally, you'd get like a weak aura to track that, because then you can space out your Reaver Glaives to keep a higher uptime on that extra 15% damage, right? So let's move over to the spec side of things then. So I just want to quickly touch on two defensives that we've got at the top of the talent tree here. So one is Netherwalk. This is basically an immunity, but it's kind of like a pseudo immunity. So this is going to reduce all damage you take by 100%. You're not going to take any damage with this popped, okay? And it lasts 6 seconds. It's also going to increase your movement speed by 100%. However, it is not a full-on immunity, because if something like applies a dot to you, if an ability hits really hard and you want to negate that damage completely by using Netherwalk, that's fine. But if it applies a dot to you or anything of the sorts, that dot is actually going to get applied to you. So after you cancel your Netherwalk or after it runs out, you will start taking the ticking damage from that dot, okay? So it's not a complete immunity, but it is a very, very good defensive nonetheless. We also have Deflecting Dance. Now, this is going to be more of like a passive buff up to your like self-healing and self-absorbs. But whenever you Blade Dance, during that Blade Dance, you're going to absorb damage up to 15% of your maximum health. So if a one-shot is coming in and you can time it well, then you're always going to want to save that Blade Dance for that one shot if that's going to save you, right? You're not going to gain any damage by sending the Blade Dance before and then dying. So you can also use the Blade Dance as a defensive cooldown if needed. It's not going to save you from these massive one-shots, but more so the value that you do get out of this is just over the course of a key when you're accidentally deflecting and absorbing this damage during your Blade Dance that you're just sending for your like damage rotation, right? Okay, so let's talk about a potential talent that you can actually swap out then. I think this is the only talent that you can swap, but currently I'm running Isolated Prey, which is going to massively buff up my single target damage, giving me 30% increased damage on I-Beam and also causing Immolation Aura to always critically strike. But this only activates when you are hitting one target. So this is purely for boss damage and it's purely for single target damage. So you're not going to get huge value out of it, but sometimes single target and boss damage is exactly what you need in a key. If you don't want that, you can swap out to Initiative up here, which whenever you first get into combat with a mob is going to increase your critical strike chance by 10% for 5 seconds. So just going to increase your overall damage here. And then whenever you Vengeful Retreat, it's going to refresh your potential to trigger this effect. So you want to be Vengeful Retreating much more on cooldown. That is also going to reset your Fellblade with a nice quality of life talent, so you can get straight back into the mix. But you do just kind of need to learn the habit of also watching Vengeful Retreat as a like mini offensive cooldown as well, right? I personally hate anything to do with movement, so whenever I can, I'm going to be playing Isolated Prey. But there are actually a few dungeons where it's not always single target or purely single target, so this does lose a lot of value, and I do just need to get more comfortable with Initiative. But you can swap these out depending on which you would rather bring to your group. The difference is very minimal. So some other notable talents then is Chaotic Transformation. So basically the idea with this talent is you want to Blade Dance before you Metamorphosis so that you can leap straight back in with Metamorphosis and Blade Dance immediately. So you're basically negating that 6-7 second Blade Dance cooldown that you normally have, and instead you're able to get basically an extra Blade Dance for free, right? This does also reset your I-Beam, but make sure that whenever you use I-Beam or your Metamorphosis, that you at least weave one Chaos Strike, or, well, it would be Annihilation in between that, because that is going to spawn an Inner Demon, which is just extra free damage. So you do not want to waste these procs. You'll normally go I-Beam into Annihilation, Blade Dance, Vengeful Retreat, Meta back in, Blade Dance, then Annihilation again. Sorry, I should be saying Death Sweep. And then you're going to I-Beam, and then you get an Annihilation off again with another Blade Dance, and that's going to give you a total of 3 Inner Demons that are going to crash into the mobs for big damage. So we've touched on the talents to do with meta now, and then the last talent that I do want to talk about is your A Fire Inside talent down here, which basically it gives Immolation Aura another charge and also gives it a 30% chance to reset the cooldown basically. So if you're lucky, you can spam these over and over and build up a huge Rage Fire, but there is some, I don't know if it's like a bug, I don't necessarily think it's a bug, maybe it's just to keep Havoc in line. You can only generate a maximum of 5 spell IDs with this and only benefit from 5 spell IDs. So you don't want to use more than 5 Immolation Auras in a row if you do get super lucky with procs. If you do press it a 6th time, then it's just going to overwrite one of the Immolation Auras that's already ticking on you, so it's just not worth the global press. That being said, ideally, like it's very rare to get that lucky, but the only other thing that I'll mention with this talent is trying not to ever be overcapping on 2 charges of Immolation Aura, because it's just free damage and free Fury generation that you're losing out on. So that is everything covered talent-wise for the Aldrachi Reaver Demon Hunter in Season 3. Everything is kind of locked in for the most part. Like I said, you could swap out Isolated Prey for Initiative, and you could swap out Army Unto Oneself into Incorruptible Spirit. Let's now move on to stats. As far as stats go for the Havoc Demon Hunter, then your best secondary stat is going to be Critical Strike right here, followed by Mastery. So basically with your gear, you're going to want to aim to go for as much crit and mastery on your gear as you can. Then you're going to follow with Haste. Haste isn't super valuable for us because we do get a lot of haste going into our meta windows, which we're pretty much always in. And then lastly, you want to go for some versatility, which is going to just flat buff your damage and also give you some extra defensive capability. Now, simming is what I'm always going to unfortunately recommend. I know it's the boring answer, but if you do just want to kind of wing it, then crit mastery on as much gear as you can is the way to go. Let's move on to enchants then. So on your weapon, you're going to rock with 2 Council's Guiles because that is going to give you extra critical strike, our best secondary stat. On your cloak, you're going to go with the Chant of Winged Grace for some extra avoidance. On your chest, always the Crystalline Radiance for that extra main stat. Your braces, you're going to go with the Chant of Armored Avoidance as well, just for some extra avoidance again. On your legs, extra main stat through the Stormbound Armor Kit. On your boots, you'll go with Defender's March. And then on your rings, generally, you'll want to run with the Radiant Critical Strike enchant. Moving on to consumables then, your flask of choice is always going to be the Flask of Alchemical Chaos. Your DPS potion of choice is going to be the Tempered Potion. And then your healing potion is going to be the new Invigorating Healing Potion. On your weapons, you'll run with Algari Mana Oil that you need to apply onto both of your weapons. You'll run with the Crystallized Augment Rune if you can afford it. Your food will be Beladar's Bounty because secondary stats are the most important for this spec, so you'll want to get some extra crit from that. And then finally, for your gems, you'll want to run with 1 Culminating Blasphemite for the extra crit and main stat from that. And then to get that extra crit, we're going to want to fill with a combination of at least 1 Emerald, 1 Sapphire, 1 Ruby, and 1 Onyx gem, and then fill the rest of them with Masterful Rubies. So, on to crafting then. So, our short-term BIS is going to be the Everforged Warglaive. It's likely going to be a huge upgrade for you. The only reason that you wouldn't do this early on is if you get lucky in the vault and you get a myth track weapon from the vault. But other than that, nothing comes close to this fat upgrade in the short term. So your first craft will likely be the Everforged Warglaive with an Ascension embellishment on it. And then your long-term BIS is going to be 2 crafted off pieces with the Dawn Thread lining embellishment on that for the extra crit. If you want to just play for the long term, for Mythic Plus, I would go with the double Dawn Thread lining embellishments. But in the short term, like I have, I crafted an Everforged Warglaive with an Ascension embellishment on it because I was sitting on some trash weapons before. Your best trinkets are going to be the Astral Antenna and the Screams of the Forgotten Sky from the raid. If, however, you're not raiding at a decent level and you can't get these at a decent item level, then the best trinkets from Mythic Plus this season are going to be Celia's Secret Technique. You could change this out for the Improvised Sephorian Pacemaker. I would run a sim to see what's best. And then your on use will be the Cursed Stone Idol from Halls of Atonement. So let's move on to what you're all here for then, which is the rotation, right? So I just want to quickly touch on some general tips for the Havoc Demon Hunter before we actually get into the nitty-gritty stuff. So general tip number 1 would be avoid wasting Fury on single target. Now this is inevitable that you're going to cap on Fury in AOE because the generation is just so much greater. But on single target, Fury is a big resource for you and you want to be dumping that and never overcapping on that. Or at least trying to never overcap, right? The next general tip that I'd like to give you guys is to basically use your cooldowns on cooldown. The majority of your damage as a Havoc Demon Hunter comes from abilities like Blade Dance, Vengeful Retreat, and also I-Beam. And these are all on a very short cooldown, so you don't want to waste all of this damage by sitting on them for an unnecessary amount of time and just losing out on all of that damage when you could just be sending them and getting that next cooldown back insanely quick, right? This is also even more relevant for the abilities that play into Aldrachi Reaver. So you've got Sigil of Flame, the Hunt, and also Sigil of Spite. These are going to contribute heavily to the amount of soul fragments that you're going to generate, and therefore contribute heavily to the amount of Reaver Glaives that you're going to proc, which is going to buff up your damage greatly. So for the most part, the only kind of cooldown that I would consider sitting on for a better time would be your Metamorphosis cooldown itself. But apart from that, all of your other much shorter cooldowns, just honestly fire them on cooldown. Then the final general tip that I'll give for Aldrachi Reaver specifically would be to always buff up your Blade Dance as your last ability in your Reaver's Glaive sequence. So you're going to send your Reaver's Glaive into a Chaos Strike, which is going to apply 1 stack of Reaver's Mark, and then you're going to use Blade Dance or Death Sweep, because that's going to slash an additional 12 times with Fury of the Aldrachi. In Mythic Plus, this is your biggest damage source, so you're going to waste a lot of damage if you do not buff that up as your last ability. I don't think there's ever a time where it is worth to use your Blade Dance or Death Sweep immediately after your Reaver's Glaive to then further buff up your Chaos Strike or Annihilation to instantly get 3 stacks of Reaver's Mark, because you can eventually, if you're lucky with Reaver's Glaives, you can also build up to 3 stacks of Reaver's Mark even if you're fully buffing and empowering your Blade Dance. So that's the general tips. Let's move over to some more advanced tips then before we get into the rotation. So my first advanced tip would be to maximize your Thrill of the Fight buff. So this is more specifically talking about the buff that increases your damage and healing by 15%. The attack speed buff is nice as well, but that lasts longer. But you want to try and maximize your uptime of this damage buff. So what you can do is send a Reaver's Glaive, do the little combo, Chaos Strike, Blade Dance. Then you can fit in another Blade Dance unbuffed before you then send your next Reaver's Glaive. That is more of a single target thing. On AoE, you just want to send your Reaver's Glaive. It does great damage itself, and you also just want to maximize the amount of Fury of the Aldrachi slashes that you can get. So just send your Reaver's Glaive on AoE, but on single target, try and delay those Reaver's Glaives a little bit to maximize your Thrill of the Fight uptime. The next advanced tip that I'll give you guys is one that we touched on earlier as well with the talents, and this basically comes this centers around your Metamorphosis cooldown. So you've got 2 talents that affect this. Your first one being Chaotic Transformation, which basically resets your Blade Dance and I-Beam when you enter your actual Metamorphosis cooldown. So all you want to do with this is make sure that your I-Beam is on cooldown before your Metamorphosis, and also your Blade Dance. There's a little sequence where you'll go Blade Dance, Metamorphosis, Blade Dance, and that kind of negates the 6-second cooldown of the Blade Dance, or the Death Sweep I guess it would be, and you'll get extra damage out of that. The other talent that you can play around and get some extra damage out of is Inner Demon. Basically with this, whenever you enter meta, whether it's through I-Beam or your actual meta cooldown, you want to press an Annihilation before you go back into meta or you extend your meta, right? So the idea here would be you I-Beam, that gets you into meta. This is going to give you an Inner Demon proc, which means your Annihilation is going to send an Inner Demon to crash into the targets for big damage. So you Annihilation after the I-Beam, then you're going to meta, then you're going to Annihilation again before your next I-Beam. So you never want to waste this Inner Demon proc. It's just extra free damage, and you should be getting, in your meta sequence, you should be getting 3 of those every time you're in your meta cooldown. Then the last advanced tip, again, we touched on this with the talents earlier, is your Chaos Nova and also your Sigils are going to generate you extra soul fragments. This is going to increase the amount of Reaver Glaive procs that you're going to get, and therefore increase your damage massively. So yes, try and use them at a good time for crowd control as well, but these are also technically a damage button or damage increase now. If you want to be super greedy with your damage, then make sure you're pressing Chaos Nova as frequently as you can to generate extra soul fragments from those mobs that are stunned. Same goes for your Sigils with your Sigil of Misery, Sigil of Spite, and Sigil of Flame. And that is just going to infinitely increase the amount of Reaver Glaives procs that you're going to get. And that's kind of where you're going to see the damage difference between a good Havoc Demon Hunter and a great but greedy Havoc Demon Hunter, okay? So let's now move on to the actual rotation. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the single target opener and then jump straight into the single target rotation and priority system, which you're going to be utilizing on bosses in Mythic Plus. And I highly doubt that you're ever going to pull one mob at a time, but just in case you do, it's useful for that as well. But this is more so for bosses, right? It's going to slightly change if there's ads on top of the boss, but this is just like a pure single target boss. This is how to do the rotation. Now, we are still using the Aldrachi Reaver Mythic Plus build that I showcased in this video already. And down the bottom right here, you're going to see my button presses. My last button press is going to appear on the right-hand side and then move across. So if you're struggling to keep up, just keep looking down there. But I'm going to pause and play the video because this is already pre-recorded so that I can slow it right down for you guys and explain my thought process as to why I'm pressing each ability, right? So you're just about to pull the boss then. This is a single target encounter. So this is going to be your opener, right? So before the tank actually pulls, you're going to want to press Immolation Aura to start generating some fury. As you can see, I already started with a bit extra fury here. So normally I would be a little bit lower on my fury to begin with. Immolation Aura is going to start ticking up your fury. Then we're going to follow with a Sigil of Flame to get that debuff active and also generate some extra fury. Now at this point, we're going to use DPS potions and then follow that with an on-use trinket that we have. So in my case, that is the Cursed Stone Idol. After that, or if you don't have any on-use trinkets, you're then going to immediately follow with a Hunt straight into your Reaver's Glaive. Now at this point, you probably aren't maxed out on your Fury because, as I said, I started with a bit more. So you're going to Fell Blade at this point, straight into an Eye Beam to get yourself into your Metamorphosis window. Then we're going to always follow our Reaver Glaive with a Chaos Strike before we press our Blade Dance, or always start with an Annihilation in meta and then follow that with a Death Sweep. So we're going to go into an Annihilation here, followed by a Death Sweep, which is also going to throw out a Glaive, which is going to apply our Soul Scar debuff. Then if you're playing Initiative, you'll backflip, or sorry, use Vengeful Retreat here. That's not actually on the global cooldown, so at pretty much the same time, you can use meta to get straight back in, as you can see there. So what we've done here is we've Death Sweeped into a meta, which has reset the cooldown of our Death Sweep so that we can press our Death Sweep again instantly, negating like the 6-second cooldown for some extra damage. Then we're going to use our Annihilation because this is going to send our Inner Demon in, as you can see just here. That's going to crash in. Then we're going to use Immolation Aura. We always want to have, or at least try and have, one Immolation Aura ticking always. One for the extra damage, the Rage Fire damage as well, but more so on single target for the Fury generation. So then we're going to Eye Beam after this. Then we're going to use a Sigil of Spite, and then follow that with a Immolation Aura because I'm about to overcap on 2 charges of Immolation Aura. Then we're going to use Death Sweep. Death Sweep is always our highest priority inside Metamorphosis, and Blade Dance is our highest priority outside. That's just going to deal extra damage than the Annihilation would. And then we want to use our Annihilation to get our final Inner Demon proc off. Now, as you can see, I got a Reaver Glaive proc, so that is my highest priority to send because I didn't have the damage amp from Thrill of the Fight after I've executed my Reaver Glaive sequence. It's going to give me a 15% damage increase and healing increase for 10 seconds. So on single target, our priority is to maximize our buff uptime of that extra damage. There is another buff tied to it where you get the 15% attack speed as well, but that's nowhere near as important as that flat 15% damage increase. So after this, we're then going to press Immolation Aura because we are about to overcap, or we were overcapping on 2 charges. As you can see, I've been pretty lucky with my Fire Inside resets, and I have 3 Immolation Auras ticking. Then we're going to follow with an Annihilation because our Reaver Glaive, we just sent our Reaver Glaive. So after our Reaver Glaive in the sequence, we always go Annihilation or Chaos Strike first, and then into a Death Sweep or Blade Dance after to get those extra 12 slashes from that Fury of Aldrachi, okay? Then we're not overcapping on our Immolation Aura, and we have enough Fury, and we've got 2 Immo Auras ticking. So we're just going to spam our Annihilation here. Then we're going to use another one. Then we got a Reaver Glaive proc, so we're going to send that into Annihilation. Use the Immolation Aura to make sure that's active and ticking our Fury back up. And then we're going to I probably should have Death Sweeped here first just to... I mean, I still have my buff, so I've Sigil of Flamed here. Then I'm going to... I should have Death Sweeped here, definitely. Oh, that's what I was waiting for. Sorry, let me go back. So, as you can see here, we're about to get the Reaver's Glaive. So then we're going to send our Annihilation. We're going to build up some Fury here. I'm waiting for here my Vengeful Retreat to come back, because before I send this Death Sweep, I'm going to Vengeful Retreat, Fellblade back in, just for like the quality of life, and then I'm going to Death Sweep for all of that extra like crit chance from my initiative proccing, which is going to give me 10% crit whenever I press my Vengeful Retreat, if I have that talent selected, right? So there we go. Vengeful Retreat into Fellblade, into Death Sweep, and you can see most of those are critting and doing big damage. Then we're going to go into an I-Beam. It doesn't matter too much using initiative for I-Beam, but you're not going to use it for your I-Beam at all, because your I-Beam is guaranteed to crit from your Looks Can Kill talent. Then we're about to overcap on Immolation Aura, so we're going to send that. Death Sweep is our highest priority button here, so we're going to send that, and then some Annihilation spam, okay? So we'll just let it continue to play here. So Reaver Glaive, Chaos Strike, Blade Dance, there we go. Then we're going to spam some Chaos Strikes, probably Immo Aura here, yeah. And then we're going to I-Beam as that's come up. You never want to sit on these low cooldowns because you're just wasting extra usages of them because the cooldown is so short on them. Then what we're probably going to do is Death Sweep into our Immolation Aura, because that was about to overcap. And then we're going to spam some Annihilations into a Sigil of Flame. Basically, like the basic premise here is just use your abilities on cooldown as they come up. And Death Sweep and Blade Dance are your highest priority. And then if you can, try and Vengeful Retreat to buff up your Empowered Blade Dance from your Reaver's Glaive sequence, because we want all of those slashes to crit, because that's huge damage, right? So I'm just going to let this play, and you guys can follow along in the bottom right here as to what I'm pressing. There we go. We've got our Empowered Blade Dance ready here. So what I've done before is Vengeful Retreated into a Fell Blade. Then we're going to follow straight with a Blade Dance. I maybe could have waited here to I-Beam first to get this into a Death Sweep, which would then buff up the damage even further. But I think I just wanted to get the extra damage amp back up. And also I-Beam is such a big damage source for us that we want to buff up our I-Beam with our Thrill of the Fight buff that we get from our Reaver's Glaive sequence, right? Then we're going to Sigil of Spite, and we're just going to continue with that. So let me just let this play, and then I'll show you a little damage breakdown after. Unfortunately, with the AOE rotation, I did forget to highlight the damage breakdown after that, but we'll just skip through here, and then you guys can see that's what the breakdown is looking like. So Soul Scar on top, followed by Annihilation, Fury of the Aldrachi, then Wounded Quarry, and then you can see I-Beam is actually a lot of damage on single target, and it would be even more so if I was playing Isolated Prey. So that is your single target opener and also your single target rotation and priority. Go back and watch that, and I'll also try and leave on screen a little breakdown of your priority system for your single target. So let's move over to the AOE rotation now. So for AOE, we're not going to open the same as we would on single target, because we don't want to use our Immolation Auras until we get into the pack so that we're ticking up a big Rage Fire for AOE damage. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a Sigil of Flame. Then we're going to, again, we would use our pot here and also our on-use trinket. Then we're going to dash in with the Hunt straight into a Reaver's Glaive. Here we're going to use our Chaos Strike. Then we're going to Fell Blade, and then what we're going to do is use our Blade Dance to then immediately gain our Thrill of the Fight buff to buff up our damage, right? After this, we're going to send all of our Immolation Auras. So these are now getting buffed up by our Thrill of the Fight buff. So these are all doing 15% increased damage. That's going to amount to a huge Rage Fire when that eventually pops. So we're going to make sure we're using all of those into an I-Beam here. Then we're going to want to use our Annihilation to make sure we proc our Inner Demon and we don't munch that proc. Into a Death Sweep. Then we're going to follow that with a Vengeful Retreat. Straight back in with Meta. Then we're going to Death Sweep immediately again. Again, completely bypassing that 6-second cooldown. So we get 2 Death Sweeps back to back inside this 15% damage amp that we've got from our Reaver's Glaive sequence. Then we're going to Annihilation to proc our Inner Demon. Straight into another I-Beam. Then we can Sigil of Spite here. another Annihilation to proc another Inner Demon. Then we're going to Death Sweep. We got a Reaver's Glaive proc here. So as soon as my global is freed up, I'm going to send my Reaver's Glaive into Annihilation to then buff up my Death Sweep even further with the Fury of the Aldrachi, which you can see there, into a Sigil of Flame. Then we're going to Reaver's Glaive again. In AoE, do not sit on your Reaver's Glaive. The Reaver's Glaive does so much damage itself, and the Fury of the Aldrachi is your biggest damage source. God, the quality is scuffed here. So you're just going to send them. On single target, you want to try and space out your Reaver's Glaives if you get lucky, because you want to, in single target, your main aim is to maximize the uptime of your Thrill of the Fight 15% damage increase, okay? So what you can do on single target is you'll want to use your Reaver's Glaive sequence, then you'll use one Death Sweep in between if you've already got a Reaver's Glaive proc, and then you can send your Reaver's Glaive, and then the next Death Sweep that comes about, you'll use, and that will pretty much give you the maximum uptime you can of your Thrill of the Fight. So then we're going to buff up our Death Sweep there with all of that Fury of the Aldrachi goodness. Spam some Chaos Strikes here. So here, I've got a Reaver's Glaive, so I'm going to send that immediately. Then I'm going to Annihilation. My Metamorphosis is probably going to run out here before I can get my Death Sweep off. So what I'm going to hopefully do, I can't actually remember, is Vengeful Retreat first, Fell Blade back in, and then use my Blade Dance outside of meta. I think I was getting greedy there, and I tried to squeeze it into my meta instead. But yeah, then we're going to spam some Chaos Strikes. Then we've got our I-Beam, so we're going to Annihilation to proc our Inner Demon. Make sure that we're always ticking an Immolation Aura for some big Fury gains and also big AoE damage through Ragefire. Then Death Sweep on cooldown. Death Sweep and Blade Dance are going to be a big source of your damage in AoE. So then we're going to Sigil of Flame here. Then some more Chaos Strike spam in between. I think I'm fishing for, I've got 5 stacks of my Reaver's Glaive proc, so I need to consume 1 more soul to get my Reaver's Glaive, which is there. So then I've sent my Reaver's Glaive. I'm going to Chaos Strike into a backflip to reset my initiative. So when I jump back in, I've got my initiative, which is 10% extra crit, which is then going to buff up this damage from the Blade Dance and Fury of the Aldrachi massively. And then that's going to give me a 15% damage buff, which is then going to buff up my I-Beam. I-Beam is one of my biggest damage sources on AoE. We're going to Annihilation to proc Inner Demon. We're going to keep our Immolation Aura ticking as well. We're going to make sure we Death Sweep before our meta finishes from our Demonic window. Sigil of Spite on cooldown. Sigil of Flame on cooldown, Hunt on cooldown. We got another Reaver's Glaive there, so we're going to Chaos Strike into a Blade Dance. I'm not going to wait around 9 seconds for my Vengeful Retreat to come back, so we're just going to send that immediately. Then I'm probably going to Immolation Aura here. We got another Reaver's Glaive, so getting a bit lucky here with the procs. Going to send my Chaos Strike into my backflip. I waited like maybe 1 second there to wait for my backflip. Fellblade back in, then we're going to buff up that damage. You can see all of these are now critting for huge damage into an I-Beam, probably into a Hunt here. Yeah, Hunt. Then we're going to Reaver Glaive, Annihilation, fit in that last Death Sweep. All of these are critting as well. I mean, that's just because we have the extra crit, all of the crit that we have through our stats. And then I could send another Immolation Aura here. We're going to Blade Dance, Chaos Strike, Reaver's Glaive. Whenever that comes up, there we go. We're going to Chaos Strike. I might wait a second here. Yeah, I do for the backflip. There we go. That's all critting into a big I-Beam, into an Annihilation, and then a Sigil of Flame because that's come up. And then we would do it all over again because meta is coming back up now. So you'll see now, I think I might delay for a second before, so I'm going to wait for this I-Beam to come back up before I'm going to use my Metamorphosis because my meta is going to reset the cooldown of I-Beam. So as you can see, everything's sort of aligned for me perfectly here. So what I'm going to do is Immolation Aura, then I'm going to Chaos Strike. I'm going to backflip to get initiative procced for this buffed up Blade Dance. I'm going to use my Trinket first. Then I'm going to I-Beam into an Annihilation and then into a meta because I've already backflipped. Then we're going to Death Sweep again immediately. Send the Annihilation to get the Inner Demon proc before we send another I-Beam because we don't want to munch those Inner Demons. And then it's just continue with the rotation from here. Okay, So that is your AOE opener, and then also your AOE rotation and priority system. Feel free to run it back as much as you want, slow it down, have a look down here as well for the buttons that I'm pressing. Don't worry about these throw glaives. This is just something to do with the ability tracker that I'm using. But these throw glaives, I'm never pressing throw glaive manually. These throw glaives are used and propped from whenever I'm blade dancing and using my death sweep, because of the Screaming Brutality talent that's going to passively throw a glaive whenever you use blade dance or death sweep. Okay, so hopefully that broke the rotation down enough for you guys, and along with the general tips and also the more advanced tips, you guys can become some pumper Havoc Demon Hunters. Now, something that I want to start incorporating into these DPS guides that I make is the defensive and utility usage. It's something that I haven't really touched on before, but I want to start doing. So, defensives for the Havoc Demon Hunter. We have a blur on a 1 minute cooldown. Now, this does increase your dodge chance by 50%, but you're never really going to press this defensive cooldown for that alone. More so, and the only reason that you're going to press this cooldown is because it's going to reduce all damage you take by 20% for 10 seconds. It's on a super short cooldown, so you can be very liberal with pressing this. I wouldn't overthink it too much. As a Havoc Demon Hunter, you have a lot of self-sustain and self-healing anyway that can kind of get you through the other rot damage that's going out. But if you're about to suffer a big one-shot or something, just send a blur. It will come back before you know it or before you need it again. So super handy cooldown in blur. Another very short defensive cooldown, which you're going to get a lot of passive value out of in keys, is deflecting dance. So while you're blade dancing, it's going to absorb incoming damage equal to 15% of your maximum health. So you can save blade dance to actually stop yourself getting like one shot by a heavy hitting mechanic. There's going to be very few cases where that is actually effective because you're only getting an extra 15% extra maximum health here, right? And you do have to time it well. You have to make sure that the blade dance is going off at the exact time that the one-shot mechanic is coming in. But more so, the value that you're going to get out of this talent is just the passive absorbs that you're going to get while you're just executing your DPS rotation. You're maybe not even noticing the incoming damage, but you're just absorbing 15% of the, or you're absorbing damage to equal to 15% of your maximum health while you're blade dancing, right? So there is just a lot of passive self-sustain and self-healing when it comes to Havoc Demon Hunter. You get healing from the soul fragments that you pick up as well. As you can see here, you're healed for 20% of your maximum health whenever you consume a soul fragment. And then when you're in your metamorphosis cooldown as well, that's going to give you an additional 10% leech to the 10% leech that you're already sat on passively. So at the end of a key, leech is going to be an immense amount of healing for you. Consuming your souls as well is going to be a huge amount of healing for you as well. And then I guess also technically the deflecting dance is considered as a healing as well. So you're just very passively tanky and self-sustaining, if that's a word, as a Havoc Demon Hunter. You can get even more self-sustain out of Incorruptible Spirit if you're playing Aldrachi Reaver, which you should be if you're watching this guide, because each soul fragment is going to shield you for an additional 15% of the amount healed from that soul fragment, right? In higher keys, like I already mentioned, you might want to swap into Army unto oneself, because your Fellblade is now going to reduce the damage you take by 10%. This can be reset whenever you want with your Vengeful Retreat cooldown, and also you're going to naturally just reset it through your rotation anyway. So having a 10% DR basically whenever you need it, and also passively when you're just using Fellblade, is super nice and going to negate a lot of incoming damage. Then the final two defensive cooldowns you have for Havoc are Netherwalk. So this is basically a pseudo immunity. I mentioned this earlier. This is going to make you immune to all damage while this is active. Also, it makes you unable to attack, so just bear that in mind. But it's going to make you immune to all damage while it's active. But if something is like applying a dot to you or something of those sorts, then the dot is going to actually apply to you. And as soon as Netherwalk is cancelled, or as soon as your Netherwalk finishes, then that dot is going to start ticking on you. So you can't use this as like an ice block or an aspect of the turtle or something like this. It is an immunity in its own way, but it's more of like a pseudo immunity, okay? Then the last defensive, I would never count on this reliably, but it's super nice for like lots of incoming rot damage, would be Darkness. And this is also super nice for your team. If you're playing in a more coordinated group, it's a super useful defensive cooldown for your whole team when you're fighting bosses or something like that. Or there's just lots of incoming damage that maybe the healer can't keep on top of. but this is going to give everybody in the darkness a 15% chance to avoid all incoming damage. So you can't use it reliably because it is RNG, but if 5 of you are stacked in that for like 10 ticks worth of damage, then you're probably going to get some good value and some good healing out of that, right? I've just realized that this is actually a 30% chance to avoid all damage while you're in a Mythic Plus group as well. So that's nice, and I'm still learning. So that is defensives covered. Now let's quickly touch on the utility. So Chaos Nova is an AoE stun on a very short cooldown, a 45-second cooldown, and it stuns all nearby enemies for 2 seconds. It does some damage, but that's completely irrelevant. You used to use this as just crowd control. However, now, as you can see in the bottom line, it also has a 30% chance to generate a lesser soul fragment. So you want to be much more on it with pressing this. Some Havoc Demon Hunters might get a little bit greedy and just press it purely for damage, but you kind of want to try and use it as crowd control at the same time. But this ability is also going to help massively with increasing the amount of Reaver Glaives that you get, because you're going to generate these extra soul fragments, right? The same goes for Sigil of Misery. Because of your talent down here, Soul Sigils, Sigil of Misery is actually going to generate you a lesser soul fragment, contributing to your next Reaver Glaive. Now, this is nowhere near as impactful as Chaos Nova, so I probably would recommend to just use this as an AoE stop. But this is going to cause all enemies hit by this Sigil of Misery to cower in fear for up to 15 seconds. This does also, it's not a fear where they like run off. This is a rooted fear. So while this is going off, they're just going to be feared on the spot. But any damage will break this after, I think it's like 1 second. So just bear that in mind. But this is a super nice ability to use as an AoE stop to stop mobs in like massive groups, right? So that's the utility that you can also use for damage, more so Chaos Nova. Let's move on to some other utility now then. So you've got Consume Magic, which basically is a purge effect. You can consume 1 beneficial magic effect from the target, and that's on a 10-second cooldown. Then we have Imprison. So Imprison can also be used as a single target stop. There are some mobs that you can't actually use it on, as you can see here. You can only use it on demons, beasts, or humanoids. But the bigger value, I would argue, from this is Imprison is one of 2 abilities in the game that will not put you in combat with the mob when they are imprisoned. So once the mob is imprisoned, you can literally like run through the mob. Your whole party can run through the mob, and they are completely hard crowd control, so they don't even know that you are there. So they can't aggro onto you, and you can skip mobs that way. And this and Sap are the only abilities in the game. All other CC will put you in combat with the mobs. I'll quickly touch on, for example, Sigil of Misery will put you in combat with these mobs. But as a Havoc Demon Hunter, if you want to do a skip with Sigil of Misery, you actually can if you're Night Elf. So what you would do is you would Sigil of Misery on the mobs. You would be the first person to get in combat and run into those mobs. Then your whole team will run past them. They won't get in combat. And then on the other side, once everybody is past, you will then press your Shadow Meld. That will drop your combat and nobody else will be in combat. And then you successfully skip those mobs, right? We also have Disrupt, which is our interrupt, and that's going to lock them out for 3 seconds. The reason that I just wanted to touch on this, obviously every class has a kick, but this actually has a 10-yard range. So this isn't, you're not locked to melee to kicking here, which is actually a super nice quality of life for a kick, especially when you're playing a melee, right? So just thought I would touch on that you don't actually need to be on top of the mob to kick here. We have a, how far is the range on this? A 20-yard range single target stun as well. So that's super nice for stopping a mob that needs to be stopped on an ability that can't be kicked. And that is going to do a little bit of damage, but that's irrelevant. We're using this for the stun, and that is going to stun them for 4 seconds. The last, it's not even a piece of utility, to be honest, but whenever you leap into your metamorphosis, whenever you land, it's going to stun all enemies hit for 3 seconds. So you're never going to use your metamorphosis cooldown around this. I mean, there might be some absolute clutch play where you like save the group by metaing to stop a one-shot going off, even though you weren't planning to meta. But this is kind of just like a nice passive stun that you get through your rotation. So it's just something to think about. And you can coordinate it like through your rotation. If you're in if you're on comms, you can be like, right, I'm about to meta stun. Then you send your stun. Then they can send like their Sigil of Silence as a VDH or whatever it is into a Sigil of Misery. So that's just something to note there. So that is all of the utility covered for the Havoc Demon Hunter as well. Now let me just quickly show you some macros that I use. So I use @focus macros for all of my single target CC. So I have that for my Imprison, my Consume Magic, my Fell Eruption, and also my Kick. And then I just have a /focus target macro here for every spec, where if I click on the mob, it's bound to my mouse wheel down, and then it would put it on my focus. And then even if I'm not targeting this mob, I can Fell Eruption it. And I mean, I was targeting it there, but I press Control 2 down here, okay? So that's all of my focus macros that I use. I use an at cursor macro for my metamorphosis, which means that just wherever my cursor is pre-placed, I'm going to leap at that location. As you can see there, it doesn't bring up the green swirly that the cursor abilities normally do in this game. And the same goes for the Sigil of Misery and also the Sigil of Flame. It just makes it super easy to just, I pretty much always know where my cursor is. So it just makes it a lot easier. I don't have to click. I feel like clicking like messes me up, honestly. It like messes up with my like camera angle or my movement a lot, because a lot of the times I'm pressing my left and right click to move, so I don't really want to release to then have to click on the floor, right? So that'll feel like it'll mess me up. Got the same for Sigil of Spite as well, and also Sigil of Misery. Then the final one that I use is a cancel Nether Walk macro. Now, while you're Nether Walked, you can't actually use any abilities. What the hell? Okay, so I can use Sigil of Flame apparently. But all this will do is while Nether Walk is active, I can press Shift X down here, and that will cancel the aura of Nether Walk, so then I can get back in and start doing my damage. Because like I'm only really going to use Nether Walk for the most part to like stop a one-shot on me, right? Sometimes I might use it to like run through something or something like that. But yeah, sometimes I just need it to cause myself to be immune to the one shot, and then I just want to get straight back on the boss and don't want to miss out on any extra damage and just sit the full 6-second duration of my Nether Walk. So that is everything covered for the Aldrachi Reaver Havoc Demon Hunter. If this guide did help you out, then please feel free to drop a like down below and also leave a comment. Subscribe to your boy for plenty more DPS guides that are coming. I'm going to try and make one for every single DPS spec this season. We'll see how I get on with that, but make sure you're subbed so you don't miss out on that. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.